Welcome, and today I'm going to be building a $400 PC only from new parts. Albeit this graphics card was something that I already owned, but let's just pretend that I bought this from new. All of these parts that's right here represent something that you can buy for $400 and build the same computer. Now, not all of the parts is going to be exactly the same for you, depending on where you live. See, I don't live in the US, and some of these parts can be found a lot cheaper in the US, which is why I had to pay a little bit more. But I'm going to link all of the products that I recommend you buying in the description so that you can buy this $400 build. Bear in mind that these prices go up and down every day, so today when you're watching the video you might not be able to find the same parts. In this video I'm going to be building it, and I'm also going to be testing it in some of the most popular games afterwards, so you can see that you don't need to spend more than $400 in order to get a quite nice and surprisingly good gaming PC. Let's start with the motherboard. The motherboard is an A520 from MSI, and this A-series motherboard is as cheap a motherboard as it can get that supports AM4. I wanted to have AM4 because I'm going to go with the Ryzen 5 4500 CPU, which is, I think today is a very good 6-core 12-thread processor, which can go up to 4.1 gigahertz boost, and this is a steal for this price. Going back just a few years, you could not be able to find it. And this is where you're more lucky. One of the points where you're more lucky in the US, because I paid more for this 500 gig SSD that you are going to be paying for a 1 terabyte SSD. I think this is because there is some taxes in the EU on storage, but this I'm going to be linking in the description which one you should be getting. And this is also something that it's the cheapest DDR4 RAM I could find, and they are actually better than what's in my current build right now. These are Corsair Vengeance DDR4 16 gig, so it's 2 times 8 gigs, and it's 3200 megahertz. I found this was the cheapest case I could find online, micro ATX, and this was the cheapest power supply I could find online. There is better power supplies at the same price, again in the US, called Thermaltake Smart. And for the graphics card, I'm going to go with the NVIDIA 1650.
When you are building your computer, it's a good thing to start with the motherboard, to just build it on the box it came in. And in this case, I like to start with putting in the CPU, which is normally the first thing you put in one of these builds. This is a bigger box because I picked this particular one because there is a cooler inside the box. Now, this cooler is not the best cooler in the world, I know that, and this is a budget build, so we are fine with sticking with a budget cooler. This is spec from AMD to be good enough for the CPU, which is why I think let's just stick with this cooler from now on. Also, this cooler comes with thermal paste applied to it. Now, I might have done it a bit different if it was me, but in this case, again, we don't have the budget to buy extra thermal paste, but you can, of course, choose to do that. When you are handling the CPU, then please be very, very gentle. Underneath the CPU, there's all of these tiny pins like this, and if just one of these pins get bent, then CPU might not end up working. And I don't know if you can see this on my screen, but there is a tiny arrow in the corner of the CPU, and then there is a tiny arrow on the corner of the CPU socket where you have to mount it. You just have to place it very gently in the same corner. This was very easy. Now I have actually already mounted my CPU to the motherboard itself. And because this is a stock cooler, it's also quite easy to mount this stock cooler to the board. Now, what you could do is, if you have a bigger cooler than the stock cooler, you might want to install the RAM and maybe even the M.2 SSD before installing the cooler. But in this case, I have a small stock cooler, and I'm just going to be installing this before I'm installing anything else. On my motherboard, I can see down here is some pinned connector called the CPU fan, and this is the header that needs to be, and this is the plug I need to plug in this plug right here. And this is the cable I need to plug in right here. I think it is a bit sad that the cooler right here doesn't like turn the right way. When you are tightening any screws on your PC build, generally you want to go diagonally and not over tightening some of the screws. So you want to start in the corners, and when you go from corner to corner, don't give it a lot, because just a few twists too much can make it very hard for you to install this. So when it's a CPU cooler, you want it quite tight but not too tight. It's hard to get a feel from, but don't over tighten any of these screws. Just make sure that it sits firmly on the motherboard. Now you can plug in this right here in the CPU fan connector. Next up on the list is usually either the RAM or the SSD, depending on what you are installing and where it's placed. But I can see my SSD on this board is right here, and I could just choose to go with the RAM first or the SSD first. Now I'm just choosing to go with the SSD. This is a tiny 500 gigabyte SSD. And in the US, you can actually get a 1 terabyte SSD for the same price, or actually cheaper than I could purchase this in the EU. So I will be linking this in the description so you can get this for yourself. And you can see there's like this tiny cutout inside of the SSD, so I can see which way it will going to be is the right way. And it's normal that the SSD, when you're installing it, is sitting upright like this, and then you have to mount it with a screw inside of your motherboard. In the case of my motherboard, I got these tiny little screws in a tiny bag that you must be careful not to lose, because now I'm going to use them to tighten it on my board. Just as with the CPU, make just sure it sits firmly, but don't over tighten any of the screws. Now I have installed my storage, my SSD right here, and it was super easy. It's actually much easier than in the old days, the old SATA SSD or the old just SATA drives, the old hard drives that you had to put in several cables to install. While I'm installing the RAM, I'm going to tell you that this is a $400 build, and I'm also going to be showing you on this channel a $500 builds, how from brand new parts I would spec it today, because there are some crazy deals out there. Make sure when you're buying RAM that you get a minimum of 16 gigs. You can get them from Team Group, that's cheaper than Corsair, and for a budget build like this, they are just fine. You can see there is a notch inside of the RAM that like shows you where to put in the RAM. See, when you're installing RAM, you have to open this, and the side this could be at the bottom or is right here. See, when you're installing RAM, you have to apply quite a lot of pressure in order to get it to click in, and that can be quite scary because normally when you have to apply pressure installing something in a computer, you're usually doing it wrong. Make sure just that the notches align in the installment here. I have so many times tried to putting in RAM that didn't get the fully click sound when you're putting it in, but I think these are firmly installed now. Now I actually have the CPU installed, the SSD installed, and the RAM installed, and I have everything that I want to install ready. Now it's time to put the computer inside the case. Now I'm going to warn you, this is not a case that looks very gamer-ish. There is no RGB in the case and nothing that makes it stand out. I have spent zero budget on the case look itself, and everything I spent on performance instead. So you could choose to maybe skim on some of the parts and have a more glowing RGB case if you want that, if it's maybe for a kid or something else. If you were to build within this budget, which part would you save your money on and which part would you spend the most money on? Please leave it in the comments, because I'd like to know that.
It's an old style case which fits a CD-ROM drive right here. I picked this because it was dirt cheap. I paid around $22 for it. And I also picked this because it has an air vent right here so that the CPU can get its air, because there is no fans in this case right here, which is a bummer, but I think we are going to be good anyways, because it's not a build that runs particularly hot. But you might want to, in the future, invest in some more airflow inside of this case. Inside of this, there is all the mounting screws right here and standoffs to mount the motherboard. And there is an extra plate right here. And these are the connectors for the front I/O right here for the USB and the on and off button. Actually, I think that these connectors are some of the only thing I found a bit tricky when installing and making a new computer, because these to just put the power just exactly the right pins, I've always found that to be a bit tricky. Everything else, just putting in the CPU and putting in the RAM, I think is super easy. The first thing you generally want to put inside of the case is a power supply. Now this power supply is from AeroCool, and I wanted to purchase the power supply from Thermaltake called Smart, but I couldn't find that in the EU, but I have a link in the description for a power supply that might fit your need better. Now normally for more expensive builds, I'd be choosing power supplies that is modular, so you don't have all of the cables going out here when you're installing it. Maybe you're used to having the power supply in the bottom of your case, but actually in the old days it was more normal to have it in the top, which is where we're also going to have it in this computer. Now the power supply should normally just fit right in, which is what it does here. It has like a shelf to be on, and I'm going to pull all the cables around the back, and then I'm going to take the screws that was in the power supply bag right here. Make sure not to mix them up with the case screws, even though they look the same, they might not be the exact same, like this. And now I want to install the motherboard inside. You can of course choose to do this the other way around, but I want to install the motherboard right now. Back right here there are some standoffs. If you have stuff like this sitting in the front, you can actually just dismount this cage right here, because you are most likely not going to be using it for anything. Now I have all my standoffs ready, and I'm going to be putting in the board. Make sure to be very gentle like this, because there's pins on the back side of the board that you don't want to damage. Now when you're doing this, make sure you're picking the right screws, because right now in this case right here I picked one of the wrong screws to mount the board with. It's not a disaster per se, but I just can't get it out again for some reason. Now this is some of the hardest part, I think, getting these cables right. And then there's the power button and the reset button. And these two right here are probably LED indicators that the power is on or off. And this can be so hard to see. These have to be mounted down here. Now this should be the right way according to my specifications in the motherboard manual, but this might be different for each of you watching. This is the hardest part, and you might need to find a guide for this online. Then we have the USB front headers for the front I/O. One says audio and one says USB. And then I have to find a connector down here. It's quite easy because this one clearly states that it's a USB. It says that on the top of it. So right now this clearly looks like a mess, and I'm going to clean it up, and then I'm going to put in the last graphics card bit. So I actually aligned it up. It was quite hard with these capacitors right behind here, but then a gentle push and then it's actually in, and I got it in. This is because this graphics card right here has an old but big DVI out here that was hard to get in the case, but now it's in. So let's just mount the graphics cards. So before I clean up all the cable mess inside here, I'm going to plug it in to see if it will actually boot up and if everything is working as it should. And more importantly, if I put in the power connector in the right slot. And as you can see right now, the system is up and running, and I'm just going to be installing Windows on this computer, and then we can get to see some tests finally on how it will perform.
This is a $400 build. I am also currently working on a $500 build and a $200 build. If you want to see these videos, consider subscribing, because then I know that you like these kind of videos.
Let's just start with testing Fortnite, and I'm recording with a camera instead of recording on screen because I don't want to spend any of the resources on the computer trying to run screen capture software while I'm recording. So I'm recording with the camera instead, and I'm sorry for the quality here. Now this is DirectX 11 right here, and let's just go into the settings. You can see we are at 70 FPS. It's a bit buggy. But let's see, now the battle bus, it's still lagging a bit. Let's see if there's something here we can quickly change. Now, something I want to have lower texture and lower effects like this. And let's see how it works like this. Now, the FPS with this DirectX 11, this is not performance mode. And we are not in performance mode, but we are doing about 80 FPS, and I'd say this is somewhat playable. Now this mouse and keyboard I'm playing on is giving me a worse experience than the actual computer itself here. So I think it looks pretty smooth, even though it's only like 80 FPS or so. I would have liked it to be maybe more 120 at least. Let's just see when still in a DirectX 11 if there's something we can do. We could of course set this to be lower. Let's set anti-aliasing just to this instead. Now we are at about this is much more playable now. It's much smoother. It's about 140 FPS. This is much more smooth. Oh, this mouse is really trash. I need a better mouse for my benchmark setup if I'm ever going to get any kills. But as you can see, even in this wind tunnel, I'm getting 120 FPS. And for a computer at $400, and not even like we're not running at performance mode right now. And this, I think it's actually quite good for not running performance mode. In a minute, we are going to see how it looks in performance mode, because most players actually, even with bigger computers, tend to run Fortnite in performance mode, because performance mode is what the pro players are using. Okay, this is not my binds. Now Megacity and the jungle area in Fortnite is a bit more demanding, but I still think that this is fairly well right here. $100 FPS is still playable, I'd say. Let's see if we can get the FPS a bit up by just lowering this to off. Off, set the anti-aliasing off.
I currently don't know what to do with this computer, so please consider joining my Discord, because I might sell this computer off for around half of what I paid for it. Join the Discord, at least if you don't get the computer, or if you choose to hand it off to someone else, then we can talk and we can create a community around PC building and headsets, keyboards, and gaming equipment. See you in the Discord.
Now we're just dropping in Fortnite with performance mode instead of the DirectX 11 or a DirectX 12, and this should be much better. Already we can see over 120 closing in when I'm going down here, closing in on 200, over 200 FPS when I'm landing on the ground. Always when you're in the air, it's going to be higher. As you can see, oh, it's Fortnite presence time. It's about 200 FPS on performance mode, and this is really where you want to be, because performance mode is both I think it's a better mode to play, and because people can't really hide behind scrubs and so on. And as you can see now, it sits over 200 FPS on a computer that's only $400. The further you look, now you can see here the GPU is only getting used like 40% and the CPU is getting used 40%, and we are at 160 FPS. I think this is very decent. It's a very playable experience. Now this monitor I'm using right here is quite trash, and the mouse is also quite trash. I'd like to have a better benchmarking setup, because this is not ideal for like really testing anything right now. There's some stuttering from time to time, and I can't really see if it's the graphics or the CPU. It doesn't look like it's any of those. This is just all buts, because I'm in a perfect butt lobby. This mouse is, I can't aim with this mouse, like I need to spray and pray. Yeah. So as you can see, 195, 180, and this is a very playable. Now I'm going to open up some Counter-Strike, some CSGO, and this is not a very demanding game, but still a very popular game. So we have tested Fortnite, which is also a popular game, and now we're going to CSGO. Now I can't really aim anything with this mouse or this keyboard, so yeah, forgive me for being a very bad player for this game. So if you can focus on the FPS counter over here, it's, okay, I'm already dead. It's over 200, sometimes 400, 300 FPS. That's chicken. I don't know how to... I really don't know how to play this game real, and this mouse is... Okay, this is a toggle sniper. And I'm dead. So if you were better at the game, maybe you'll have a better experience, but I'm having 200 FPS and it's really smooth. It's a smooth dying experience for me, this one. 200 FPS, and bear in mind this is a $400 computer, and I think all the settings is even it's in auto and high, so everything is just in high in auto, and it's like still pulling in 200, 300 FPS. And I think that you don't need to spend any more to get a decent... Oh, get the chicken, yes. So Rocket League is also one of these games that's not very demanding of your system, but as you can see, we are running at 200 FPS, and it's maybe I should try and test what this could actually do in 4K in Rocket League. So now it's harder to see the FPS counter in the corner, but I actually just opened Rocket League in 4K, and this is a very smooth experience, even though it's 4K on a computer that's $400. I know Rocket League is not the most demanding game in the world, but come on, this looks very good on a computer for only $400. Maybe we should have seen if Counter-Strike was actually better at 4. In a game like Rocket League, you don't actually need more FPS than this. I think like this really looks good. Crank it up to 4K if you have the monitor like this. Really a great experience. And now I can really feel the computer working some more. It's using 100% of the GPU now. Now it's being put to work. I don't know if you can hear it on the camera, but it's very, very loud now. On this channel, I'm also going to be building a $500 computer and even a $200 and $300 computer. So consider subscribing if this is something that you're into. Also, I would like to know if there is some games that you want me to benchmark with these computers. So hopefully I'll see you in the comments. Thank you for watching.